Good evening, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the release of the Status of Policing in India Report 2020-21, Volume 2, Policing in the COVID-19 Pandemic. This second volume of SPIR 2020-21 looks at the nature and role of policing during extraordinary circumstances created by the global pandemic and the consequent national lockdown. To begin the event, I would like to invite Mr. Avdendra Sharan to give the welcome address. Mr. Sharan is the director of the Center for Study of Developing Societies and author of several books on environment and urbanism. He has been a supporter of the SPIR series at every stage. I would now like to invite him to take over for the welcome address.
Well, thank you, Radhika. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Center for Study of Developing Societies to welcome all of you to this evening's function. I've had the privilege of attending the release of all the previous reports, and all the discussions have been wonderful. So this evening, I'm sure, will be as good, especially because this report concerns a very special circumstance where police is both at risk, being frontline workers themselves, but also enjoying great emergency powers in such a situation. So I really look forward to this evening's report. The release, it's a great pleasure to extend a very special welcome to Justice Deepak Gupta, who will be delivering the keynote address this evening. A very warm welcome to all our panelists, Ms. Nikita Sunavana, who's a lawyer, Dr. Ish Kumar, former DG Director, NCRB, and Mr. G.K. Pillai, former Home Secretary of India. The report will be presented by my colleagues, Professor Sanjay Kumar, who heads the Look-DT program at CSDS, and my good friend, Dr. Vipul Mudgal, who's the director of Common Cause. And this report has been done in partnership, as all other reports have been done between these two institutions. Finally, it's a great pleasure to also welcome Ms. Shloka Nath, who's the head of the policy and advocacy team at Tata Trust. I believe that they have been, together with the Lal family, generous supporters of this study over a period of time. So thank you very much. And Professor Suhas Parshikar and Dr. Sandeep Shastri, who along with Sanjay have been running the Look-DT program so successfully over the years. So very warm welcome to all of you, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Ms. Shloka Nath to say a few words about the report and about the SPIR project. Ms. Nath currently heads the Policy and Advocacy Department at Tata Trust. She is also the Executive Director of the India Climate Change Collaborative. We see her as a long-term friend and partner of Common Cause. Ma'am, please say a few words about the project.
Thank you, Radhika. And I'd like to begin by thanking Vipul Mudgal, of course, Dr. Sanjay Kumar, and Justice Deepak Gupta. I'm sure that their insights on the functioning of the police system is going to be of great interest for the participants in today's launch event. I'm also looking forward to hearing their thoughts. And I'd also like to express my appreciation for the team at Common Cause, as well as Look-DT, the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, the team at the Lal Family Foundation, of course, the Tata Trusts, and everyone who's been part of this event. The COVID-19 pandemic has proved to be a very challenging time for the country, especially for the most vulnerable and marginalized communities. And the purpose of the police in our society is to promote public safety and to uphold the rule of law to ensure that citizens can meet their potential. Trust and accountability between law enforcement and civil society is essential to advancing these goals. India's public health response to COVID-19 engages two distinct police functions: the maintenance of public order and social service provision. And in this context, the lockdown posed great burdens on frontline police officers, especially due to the capacity as well as the budgetary constraints they faced. Police agencies had to enforce strict social distancing rules, which added pressure to existing vulnerabilities. And there were instances of use of disproportionate force towards the poor as well as the low income segment during the lockdown, which could have been avoided. The law enforcement and police forces have been an integral part in protecting the public as well as achieving public safety. As the role of the police evolves beyond maintaining law and order, how should the police system, policymakers, as well as civil society navigate the tensions between public safety and good policing while building trust? And this is where initiatives such as the Status of Policing in India report have such an important role to play. There is a lot to improve in our systems, but it also shows that there are already steady efforts in improving the existing conditions. While the first volume, released in April 2021, covered policing in regions affected by conflict, extremism, or insurgency, the second volume of the report focuses on the COVID-19 situation, specifically in terms of interactions between the people and the police during the lockdown, the way the crisis was handled, and challenges that have emerged. The report analyzes data from a survey of common people and police personnel from 10 states and union territories during the pandemic. And the report also looks at the media coverage of the nature of policing during the pandemic, especially during the initial phases of the national lockdown. The Tata Trust is proud to have supported this initiative, and therefore it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to the launch of the second volume of the Status of Policing in India report, and to congratulate the teams behind the excellent effort, as well as architects, of course, like Vipul, who were constant friends and guides in its development. I hope the insights from the report will be helpful for both policymakers as well as civil society. Thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you, Shloka. Before we officially release the report, I would like to introduce Professor Sanjay Kumar and Dr. Vipul Mudgal, who will be presenting some of the key findings of the report. Professor Sanjay Kumar is the co-director of Lokniti program at CSDS. He's an author of many highly acclaimed books. A political analyst and psephologist of global repute, he's a core member of the SPIR advisory team. Dr. Vipul Mudgal is the director of Common Cause and a former editor of Hindustan Times in Jaipur and Lucknow, a regional editor of Asia Times in Bangkok, and a BBC journalist in London and Delhi. The SPIR project is his brainchild. May I now invite them to present the key findings of SPIR 2020-21 Volume 2. I would also like to inform all the participants that we will be keeping everybody on mute. If there are any questions, you can please type them in the chat box, and if there is time, we will take them up later after the panel discussion. Sanjay ji and Vipul, please.
Honorable Justice Deepak Gupta, former Judge, Supreme Court of India, Dr. Ish Kumar, former DGP and Head NCRB, Shri G.K. Pillai, former Home Secretary, Government of India, and Nikita Sonavane, lawyer and activist. It gives me immense pleasure to announce that Lokniti CSDS, in collaboration with Common Cause, has completed a study on policing in the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the fourth study which the two organizations have successfully completed during last 3 years under the broad banner, which we have stated, Status of Policing in India report. This, as has been mentioned earlier by Radhika also and by Shloka also, this is the fourth report. And in the third round, we are releasing the second report, which we are calling part 1 and part 2. So this is the second part of the third report. So the first report looked at people's experience dealing with the police, their perception and expectations from the police. So in the first report, we actually interviewed the common citizens of the country. The second report looked at police adequacy and the working conditions. The study was based on interviews conducted among the policemen. So in the second report, we interviewed policemen across the country. The third report, which was released earlier this year, looked at policing in conflict-affected regions. And in this study, we interviewed the common citizens and policemen who were living in these conflict-affected regions. This report looks at policing in COVID-19 pandemic. This study is based on interviews among, again, common citizens and the policemen in 19 cities, which are spread across 10 states and union territories. These reports may not be the only report on policing in India. There have been other reports on policing in India, but I'm sure what makes these studies different from other studies is that all these reports are based on data collected through nationwide surveys. normally sometimes we come across studies which claim to be national studies, but the studies are restricted to few states, few cities. But the importance of this study is all the reports which have been released earlier and the report which we are releasing today. These are really a nationwide studies conducted. As I said, this study is conducted in 19 cities spread across 10 states. It is also important to mention that the data is collected using face-to-face interviews. During the last couple of years since pandemic, whenever we talk about survey, people would ask this question, is it possible to conduct face-to-face interviews, or have we done online interviews or interviews through telephone? The importance of these two reports is that both the studies draws upon data which has been collected using face-to-face interview method. The data collection for the last two studies has not been easy. It has been extremely challenging. I'm not saying that the challenge of conducting data in the normal time is not there. It's also challenging because we have to, like in the second report, we needed to interview lots and lots of policemen. And I'm happy to say that, a lot of people helped us with all kinds of. Prakash Singh ji helped us with the letter, which was very, very useful in the field. So, but the data collection for this report was far more challenging due to pandemic. But I'm happy to report that the field investigator completed successfully the data collection exercise, maintaining all the guidelines, pandemic guidelines, maintaining social distancing, wearing masks during the field work, and using sanitizers. We have some very interesting finding coming from the study. I'm leaving it for my colleague Vipul Mudgal, who is representing Common Cause. He would be sharing some of the interesting findings which comes up from the latest study. So over to Vipul.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thanks everybody for coming. I must start by saying that this is a teamwork, and what I'm presenting is on behalf of all the people who have really worked very hard under trying circumstances. And we are also very kicked about this report because we took advantage of the pandemic, whereas earlier it was quite clear that we will not be able to bring out even a single report. And we finally managed to bring out 2 reports this year, which is like, it's a surprise, but I think I hope that our team will continue to surprise others and ourselves. And I also must say that 2 of the lead researchers of this effort, Manjesh Rana, who's sitting next to Sanjay ji. Manjesh, you can raise your hand just to, yeah, but if you can hear me, and Radhika Jha. These people have done all the work and taken a lot of flack from us. They've worked on data, they worked on surveys, they worked on publication, presentation, display, everything. So thanks all of you. And let me just give you a little idea of what this report says. So I'll have a share screen and I will just take you through some of the findings of this. As Sanjay ji said, that there are 4 status of policing in India reports so far, all 4 of them with the support of Tata Trusts and Lal Family Foundation. These have been nationwide surveys, and the one we are talking about now is the 4th report, and this is about policing in the COVID-19 pandemic. As Sanjay ji said, it was the most challenging of all. The very fact that some people needed to go out both to the police stations and to common people, make them sit down and say that I'm representing such and such organization, and we are, I'm going to talk to you for the next 40 minutes or 35 minutes, and please answer. It was not easy. It was a very difficult task, but at the same time, I'm so happy to say finally it was done to like complete academic rigor. The work is, as always, of very high quality. The first report that we brought out in April was on policing in conflict affected regions. This was also first report of its kind on all the conflict affected regions affected by extremism, insurgency, any form of militancy and terrorism. Unfortunately, a small part, Srinagar, could not be included in this for various reasons, but the report is also there. All of you can download the report from Common Cause website. You can also write into us, and we will definitely send you the report immediately. Now, this report has a survey of about 3,600 people, out of which about 1,200 police officers and about 2,500 civilians, as Sanjay ji said, 19 cities, 10 states, and it was like both tier 1 and tier 2 cities were covered. Now, one of the things that we found while talking to the police officers was the biggest task for them was to managing the public. And they constantly said that, look, everything else is fine. Even the health services, we can take the sick to the hospital, we can do many other things, but it is impossible to manage the public. When they come out and we ask them to go back, and initially the awareness about the pandemic was not so much. So people needed to come out, and then later on, when free rations and the camps were organized for giving free food to people, then throngs of people will come out, and it will become the responsibility of the police to separate them, to tell them that please follow social distance, this, that, and the other. So they were saying that there were, of course, there were many other, challenges like safety and security of people, health risk of police personnel themselves, but the biggest challenge for them was to managing the public. And now again, in the management of public, if you go through the report, you will see there are many aspects of managing the public, and how at many places they used their discretion. Some places the policemen themselves did not know how to do it. At some places they used loudspeakers, and some other places they used social media and various other things. Now, because there was so much of interface between police and the public, so it was only to be expected that there will be confrontations. So there were negative people-police interactions almost on daily basis. And about 30% people told us that these confrontations were very common. And people also said that they were like really scared of the police, and they were particularly scared of either being fined by the police or being arrested by the police. Now, if you go through the finer points, if you go through the whole report, you'll find the contours of how it happened. But I'm just skimming through. I'm just telling you the basic broad findings. Now, the fear of the police, if you dissect it and see who were the people who were living in the fear of the police and why, then you would see that the poor and those belonging to the lower classes were a lot more fearful of the police, particularly of police manhandling them, of using physical violence or arresting them. But conversely, the police also said that it was the poor and their localities who were the least compliant of the lockdown rules. Now, the problem is that they live in very congested localities. There are 4 people to a room. There sometimes even more, and of course, when they come out in throngs. So no marks for guessing why it was happening. But if you see the data, you'll find that the rich were not only less fearful of the police, but they very often said why. There was absolutely no fear of the police. We were perfectly all right. We did not have any negative interaction with the police. Now, when it came to accessing your daily needs, you needed to come out. People like the poor who live for the day, who get their rations every week, sometimes every day, they needed to come out. And we saw that, in fact, you will see if you can read it, the rich people, only about 13% people found it very difficult to access their basic needs, while the poor, about 30% people, more than double, they found it very difficult. And then if you combine very difficult and somewhat difficult, you realize that it was a nightmare for the poor, while it was all right for the rich and the middle class. Now, there were forceful evictions of tenants. Now, this was a very painful thing because one, you lose your job. Where do you go after losing your job? You come back home, and there you get an eviction notice from your landlord saying that, well, you have to vacate immediately if you can't pay. And you can't fault the landlords because in these areas, in particularly in the areas of the poor people, the landlords themselves are not rich people. They are also poor people, and they are also scared that if they do not get their rent, then perhaps there will be more problems for them, and they also need to run their family. So there were all kinds of human situations there, but the fact was that the eviction was much more for the poor. And we also looked at how much was of the Dalits and the tribals and the Muslims, and we realized that the minorities and the people belonging to SC/ST classes, it was much more both the real evictions and the threat of an eviction. And invariably for this kind of things, you go to the police. And particularly the landlords would go to the police and say that, please get my house vacated. So this kind of interactions were also going on. Now, putting the police in the dock very often. Now, the economically disadvantaged people were also victims of discrimination, both by the state, and because the police became the face of the state, by the police also. So we know that we spoke to many, in fact, we conducted a separate study in which we spoke to two sets of people: migrant workers who were going back home, and the relief workers, the aid providers, those who were working for different NGOs or government organizations or non-government organizations, school teachers who were distributing food and rations to people in need. So we spoke to relief workers and migrant workers, and they told us, 50% of aid workers said that the police discriminated against the Muslims during the lockdown. And this was happening particularly in the beginning phase, because this was a time when one particular section of Tablighi Jamaat was of an organization called Tablighi Jamaat was blamed for spreading the virus in India. So people down the line, and it was not BJP or non-BJP, it was like all over the country, that there was conflicting signals emerging, and the policemen were also reading things in newspapers, on television, which was like showing it. So in fact, even in a Congress ruled state like Rajasthan, we got the information, and many people, in fact, told us, we spoke to both aid workers and migrant workers, that it was very often that when a fruit seller or a vegetable seller would come out whenever the curfew will be relaxed, then they would tell the Muslim sellers to just go back and say, "Aap mat aiye samne." Aapko mana kar diya, ek bar mat aao. In some occasions, they were their carts were upturned. So this was going on, and Nikita will tell you that the tribals were the worst victims. In fact, very often the police arrested the tribals for the same offense for which they just let others go. So this was also going on. So we realized that it was the economically and socially disadvantaged groups, particularly the poor, and this does not apply to rich scheduled castes or rich minorities. It applied particularly to the poor section of people. So we also spoke to many people who were slum dwellers or who were homeless, and we realized that the level of discrimination was very high. Now, migrant workers going back home, all 30% policemen, which is a very high number, said to us that they came across situations when the migrant workers were trying to get shelters, and they were trying to enter shelters like a school building or something like that, and they were prevented by the police, where they themselves are saying, yes, we prevented them because the orders were coming. And half of the police personnel said that they had to use force against the migrant workers. Now, the 1 in 4, almost 25% migrant workers told us that, there was a lot of confusion about who will provide you shelter, if at all they were to be provided shelter. So invariably, this also fell on the policemen, that they either needed to provide shelter or needed to stop them from going into shelters where they're not supposed to go. So the rapid survey that we conducted with the migrant workers and the relief workers, which is separate from the main survey nation in 10 states, we realized that the migrant workers and aid workers, they said if there had been slightly longer notice, instead of an abrupt 4-hour notice, then perhaps, the difficulties would have been much less for everybody. Now, use of force against the migrant workers, we also saw that the rude use of force was very, very frequent, and detentions and arrests and lathi charge, and giving them on the spot punishments like murga banja, do otak baitak, do detention, raise your hand, stand for 2 hours, and things like that. It was like rampant all around. Now, when you ask the police, now this is a conundrum we have not attempted to answer, but this, almost everybody we spoke to, they rated the police behavior positively, while in the same breath also saying that they were discriminating, they were beating us, they were unfair to us, they were not helping the tenants, they were helping the landlords in eviction, etc., etc. But when you ask them that their overall role, do you think they needed to do this, they somehow said mujhe chhod do, but otherwise they were quite okay. Wo nahi karenge to kaun karega, somebody has to do this. Now, even those who were treated badly by the police, they rated the behavior of the police in somewhat kind of positive way. So you see these two pillars here, 40% and 46%. 40% said that they were quite good and efficient, and 46% said that they were kind of somewhat good and efficient, which makes it about 9 out of 10 people. So again, I mean, in their role in controlling the outbreak, etc., was like perceived as positive, more or less. In tier 2 and tier 3 cities, people rated their their behavior and their role and their efficiency even better than tier 1 cities. Now, this is like, again, very well understood that general crime like theft, robbery, murder, kidnapping, etc., which are the normal stock crime, it really came down during the lockdown. But there was an increase in domestic violence, violence against domestic abuse, and violence against women, and cyber crimes, which increased during the lockdown. Now, between the cities, we saw that we had two categories. Tier 1 cities were either the state capitals or the metro cities, and the tier 2 and 3 cities were the rest of the cities. And we also went to many districts which were like really, really small places. And we realized that there was a discrimination between policemen and policemen. The policemen got, say, additional monetary incentive in tier 1 cities. They got slightly better arrangement of accommodation for frontline policemen, those who were directly working at the hospitals or with the health workers. They were given special accommodation much more in the tier 1 cities than in tier 2 and 3 cities. And again, special insurance cover or other kind of or training or equipment, and everything was a lot better in tier 1 cities rather than tier 2 and 3 cities. There was no reason for it, but it was like that. Now, the working hours the police persons are, as such, we have said in earlier SPI reports, is very high. But we saw that 11 hours was like very common. It was normal for almost everybody. Almost 80% policemen told us, and including those who had comorbidities and who had problems of their own, they also said that they were working 11 hours. and more than a quarter said that they were working more than 15 hours a day during the lockdown, which literally meant that they went home only to eat. And we also realized that a large number of policemen were working in frontline duties and they were going back home, which means the smaller homes where many family members were there. Some of them were old people, a lot more vulnerable. Some people were even sick. So this was also going on. So this is about the working conditions of the police. Now, mental health of the police, like really understudied area. When we asked these questions, these questions were asked in various different ways, directly and indirectly, and we realized that 9 out of 10 police personnel had they reported that they had either like extreme stress, extreme pressure, or other mental health issues which were a lot more serious. And half of them, more than half of them, said that they received some kind of training. I think there was some confusion between briefing and training. So a lot of people said that they were provided like a little bit of training, to deal with this kind of an unprecedented health emergency situation. The states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu fared a lot better than Bihar, states like Bihar and West Bengal and UP. But we have not presented those findings from different states here because it was done in only 19 districts and the entire states were not covered. But these were the contours that we found. Then there's a special chapter we have given on the media coverage of the pandemic and the policing during the pandemic. It is so we studied 2 newspapers in Hindi and 2 newspapers in English and their website, and constantly all the reports they covered, there were all kinds of things going on. But we realized that the media were completely police friendly, so much so that, I mean, one can understand that they need to be, in a situation of crisis, they need to be on the side of the authorities for the simple reason that they need help. They sometimes need to disseminate things, at a time when protocols are changing every 2 hours or 6 hours, they need to kind of work with the police. But at the same time, it is the job of the media to ask questions about excessive surveillance, questions about the use of drones, questions about the face detection technology. Now, they have reported this as a matter of fact that yes, all this was going on and all this was very good things, geofencing, face detection technology. Now, we also asked them, but the policemen there, that do you have any legal provisions to use these things? And they gave different kind of answers. But it's very interesting to see that the media hardly raised any critical questions about policing. They were kind of very police friendly coverage. In fact, at many places they got people like police mitras. Now the police mitras came out and they were wielding lathis and stopping people, but nobody asked how were they selected, who were these people. I mean, one is not saying that you tear apart the police, but it's just that ask that critical question, how things are done so that they are done better in future. So all that you would see in a special chapter on the media coverage of the pandemic in the Hindi and English media. So I stop here. Thank you very much for listening. And as I said, the reports are available. We will share with you the reports, and all the people we had sent invitations to, we will also send them a soft copy of the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay ji and Vipul, for giving us such an extensive overview of the report. Before we start with the panel discussion, I would request the chair and keynote speaker, Justice Deepak Gupta, the co-chair and moderator, Professor Sandeep Shastri, the panelists, Ms. Nikita Sonavne, Mr. Ish Kumar, and Mr. G.K. Pillai, to release the report along with the Common Cause and CSDS team. sir. And ma'am, can you please hold up your copy of the report?
If your copy is in front of you.
And I'm in Simla, so I only have one of the smaller of the.
Thank you.
Vipul, can you please stop sharing your screen? I think it's still on screen share.
Okay.
No.
So screen
No.
share from my
Okay.
side, it stopped. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Right. So we have the honor of having with us some esteemed panelists and chairs who are pioneers in the field. Our panelists today come from a wide range of expertise in the areas of law, governance, and policing. We have with us Ms. Nikita Sonavne, who's a legal researcher and advocate and co-founder of the Criminal Justice and Police Accountability Project, which is a Bhopal-based litigation and research intervention focused on tribal and marginalized communities. The CPA project is known for its grassroots work on access to justice. In fact, earlier this year, Nikita and her team at CPAP had come out with an excellent report on police discretion during the pandemic called Counter-Mapping Policing During the Pandemic, I think. Counter-Mapping Pandemic Policing, yes. Our next panelist is Dr. Ish Kumar, who is a former Director General, Vigilance and Enforcement of the Telangana Police Service. He is also the former Director of the National Crime Records Bureau. He has a wide range of expertise in the areas of national security, criminal law, crime analytics, community policing, and governance. The final panelist of the session is Mr. G.K. Pillai. Mr. Pillai is an IAS officer of Kerala cadre and former Union Home Secretary. An alumni of IIT Madras, he has been a district collector, special secretary industries, secretary health, and principal secretary to the chief minister. In New Delhi, he has worked in the ministries of defense, surface, transport, home, and commerce. Today's session will be moderated and co-chaired by Professor Sandeep Shastri, who is the Vice Chancellor of Jagran Lake City University and the National Coordinator of the Lokniti Network. He is also an author, academic, and one of India's best-known commentators on TV. Professor Shastri has been SPIR Advisory Board member since its inception. May I now request Professor Shastri to please take over the panel discussion on the topic law enforcement in crises, discretion, excessive, and expectations. In case the participants have any questions addressed to the panelists or to the chair, kindly send them in the chat box. Because of paucity of time, we may not be able to take up all the questions, but we will try our best to cover as many as possible. So, Professor Shastri, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Radhika ji. Sabhi ko namaskar. It's indeed a pleasure to moderate this very, very distinguished panel discussion. We just have had a snapshot of the report from Vipul ji, and I'm sure it has developed that interest in everybody about what the report would say. I think three important points which came out in Vipul ji's initial presentation was the report's reference to the levels of preparedness of the police and the recognition of the work that they have done. And at the same level, the socioeconomic factors in terms of the response of people to the work that the police did during the pandemic. So I think there are interesting dimensions of the report which Vipul ji highlighted. So may I straight now invite our three panelists to share their reflections on the report and on the broader theme. May I request each panelist to take a maximum of 10 minutes to make their initial comments so that there is more time for discussion, for more time for response to questions, and also more time possibly for a dialogue between the panelists also. So could I request Nikita ji to start the discussion with her first 10 minutes of intervention on the theme?
Thank you, Professor Shastri. Thank you so much. for having me here and inviting me to share my thoughts on the release of this very important report. I think the question of policing, particularly the kind of policing that took place during the pandemic, is one that merits attention. And I think it's important for us to reflect on these very pertinent questions that the status of policing in India report has raised around what kind of policing took place during the pandemic, who were at the receiving end of it, and what kind of questions this raises for the institution of police in itself in India that merits further reflection. And I want to attempt to reflect on these questions today from our experience of engaging with them as lawyers and researchers working in Madhya Pradesh around the questions of policing, right? So as Radhika mentioned in her introduction, there was work that we've done around the question of pandemic policing in Madhya Pradesh. And I want to be able to contextualize the findings of today's report, in light of our experiences in the state, right? So I want to start by thinking about the question of who was arrested during the pandemic, who were the recipients of policing during the pandemic. As we saw that as soon as the lockdown was enforced, of course, the police were the sort of first responders to the pandemic and to enforcing the lockdown. And, I want to reflect on this one aspect that Vipulji also raised during his presentation, and something that the report mentions, which is that the poorest were all thrice as likely to report many cases of forcible evictions, and also socio-religious groups like Dalit Muslims and other minorities were likely to be forcibly evicted during the lockdown. And generally, the report notes that these were groups that were at the receiving end of the pandemic. And during our work in Madhya Pradesh, we found that nearly 30% of those who were individuals who were arrested for violating lockdown regulations belong to SC, ST, and denotified tribal communities who were the erstwhile criminal tribes, while 20% belong to the OBC groups, and nearly 25% belong to the Muslim communities. So, we're looking at approximately 3 out of every 4 individuals belonging to marginalized communities. And in the case of Muslims, as Vipulji was also mentioning, with the Tablighi Jamaat incident and the question of the spread of COVID-19 being pinned on that particular incident, we saw that while the population of Muslims in Madhya Pradesh was close to 7%, their representation within this set of people that were arrested was 25%. And we saw this, and to really be able to contextualize this in the experiences of people, we saw FIRs particularly against people from Muslim communities being filed. For in one instance, an FIR was registered against a person who had put up a WhatsApp status saying, "Main Nizamuddin Markaz ke saath hu." And the FIR was registered by saying that, the Tablighi Jamaat has been responsible for the spread of COVID-19, and a WhatsApp status like this contributes to that general dissatisfaction against a religious community. And, subsequently, there were several high courts that quashed the FIRs against members of the Tablighi Jamaat. But what FIRs like this that were filed by the police on a daily basis did was really perpetuating and sort of cementing that sort of narrative that certain sections had actually disproportionately contributed to the spread of the pandemic, right? And I also want to be able to see what were these people who were on the streets and against whom FIRs were registered and were subsequently arrested for violating the lockdown doing, right? So who were these people? So we saw that these were actually 45% of these were people who were providers of essential goods such as groceries, vegetables, fruits, dairy products. So we saw that a majority of also these FIRs were filed against pedestrians, which is very interesting and in stark contrast to the paltry sum of FIRs that were registered against four-wheeler drivers. So I think that puts this into perspective the kind of people and the kind of social location of the people who were targeted and who were arrested during the pandemic by the police, right? So we saw almost like every fifth individual policed was essentially either a street vendor or a low-income shopkeeper. So we've seen that, there were these people who were arrested, and I think it's also important to see what kinds of offenses they were arrested for, right? So we saw this during the period of the lockdown, which is starting from the 22nd of March, when the Janta curfew was imposed, to the beginning of June, that 82.5% of all arrested persons were those who were arrested for low-level crimes or infractions. And to really put that into perspective about what that means in terms of the law, is that these were all people who were arrested for offenses that are punishable by 7 years or less, and which in law, particularly, after the Honorable Supreme Court's 2014 judgment of Arnesh Kumar, do not mandate arrest. So we saw that, bailable IPC offenses really contributed the largest proportion of crimes that arrests were made for. And, as lawyers who engage with these communities that were arrested during this period, I want to be able to contextualize what it meant for people who were arrested, right? So we had one client, a young 20-year-old man from the Pardhi community, one that, bears the stigma of historical criminalization, who was arrested for allegedly transporting about 60 liters of country liquor, and he was incarcerated for 3 months during the pandemic under the MP Excise Act, even though he suffered from tuberculosis, and the offense that he was charged for is punishable by a maximum of 3 years. So we saw that, there were these really stark contrasts between also the kind of jurisprudence and the kind of directions that the Supreme Court was laying down during this time, right? Because right at the beginning of the pandemic, we had the Supreme Court take cognizance of overcrowding in Indian prisons and really enforce the letter and spirit of Arnesh Kumar to say that, well, we shouldn't be making arrests for offenses that are punishable by less than 7 years unless there are compelling reasons to do so. And so we did look at FIRs that were filed during this period to see whether there was any mention of these compelling reasons that would warrant arrest, right? And we saw that there weren't any. In fact, there were these standard responses that said that, the reasons provided by the accused were unsatisfactory, unnecessary, or unclear. These sort of typological responses, and therefore arrest was made without, any kind of compliance or reflection on what it means in terms of the law, right? So really to come and think about the question of discretion. Discretion is, of course, the ethos of policing, and one that is a crucial element for the for the police to be able to discharge their duties, right? And while one understands and values the importance of police discretion, I think for us it's important to be able to think about and reflect on against whom this discretionary power is exercised, right? Because as the status of policing in India report notes, and through our experiences of working with marginalized communities, we've seen that this discretion more often than not is exercised against people of marginalized communities who are at the receiving end of violence, subjected to illegal detention in police custody, and in the pandemic also were arrested and therefore exposed to the threat of the virus, right? So I think it's important for us to see that, the social context within which the police is operating, right? We are a society that struggles with questions of casteism. We are a society that struggles with questions of communalism. And so for us, I think it's important to see how much or if the institution of policing is immune to the biases, the pre-existing biases that exist in society, right? So what we have seen during
Nikitaji, could we have 2 minutes more of an intervention and then we...
Absolutely. So what we've seen during the pandemic is really a culmination of, everyday policing and really the abuse of discretionary power that is sort of the essence of everyday policing in so many ways, of which, marginalized communities bear the largest brunt. And I think the question of police accountability is one that has been documented by various reports, right? Whether it's the Law Commission reports, whether it's the commissions that have been set for criminal law reforms, or whether, of course, it was the Prakash Singh judgment from 2006. And I think for us now, I think it's important, after seeing the way that policing has panned out during the pandemic, to be able to reflect on these questions. I also want to close by saying that, during the pandemic, one of the things that this kind of these indiscriminate arrests have done is really contributed to the question of overcrowding of prisons, which in the context of Madhya Pradesh has meant that the prison population rose from 153%, which we were at during the beginning of the pandemic, to 180% about 2 months ago, which is slightly a year into the pandemic, right? So I think we have to be able to think of what questions of policing mean, not just, of course, for particular communities, but the kind of implications that it has for the prison system and the criminal justice system as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikita ji, for reflecting on the report and also supplementing what the report says with your own experience from the ground and your organization's work on the ground. Thank you so much. We now move to Dr. Ish Kumar. Sir, your 10 minutes of reflection on what you think the report is about and what you garnered out of the report.
Thank you, Professor Sandeep Shastri. Good afternoon to all of you. Let me begin with by congratulating the Common Cause, the CSDS and other partners in bringing this series of reports for the last 3 years on the status of policing, right from, I think, 2018 onwards, every year covering one aspect of the policing. To my knowledge, there are no such reports or series of reports earlier. We in the government publish, the NCRB does publish crime in India, accidental deaths and suicides in India, the prison statistics in India, but they are more of a statistical treatises, not with these kind of surveys or the interview-based kind of things. There are definitely crime victimization surveys done by some NGOs like IDFC and CHRI prior to that. So Common Cause, please keep it up and go ahead with these kind of reports. In long term, they are going to be very, very helpful for the policing to improve. Now, coming to the present report, as a retired police officer, whatever I'm going to say, it's not really a justification for any of the police actions, but maybe I will try to look for some of the reasons for why the police behaved the way they behaved. So, Nikita ji has just now spoken about indiscriminate arrests and targeting of some of the marginalized groups, which the report also talks about. My own impression is, except for a Muslim minority, maybe they were targeted this time because I think the briefing started right from the Ministry of Health, where the separate group of COVID spreaders were being listed out as Tablighi Jamaat. Now other groups get specifically targeted, but maybe because those are the people easily visible on the ground, the action gets taken place against them. I don't think before taking any action, anyone tries to find out whether you are a SC or you are a ST or you are a OBC. I really don't think so. Now, obviously, when these kind of arrests are taking place or beatings are taking place, or maybe the fear of police, which the report talks about, I must say that this is not specific to the pandemic policing. Some of these issues are age-old issues which the police system in India ails from. Our law of a colonial setup, 1861 Indian Police Act. So this lack of sensitivity towards a common man, lack of service orientation, some of the inherent biases like caste biases, gender biases, and a feeling that khaki gives you power to do anything, belief in danda culture, and maybe lack of democratic values, lack of accountability. All these issues we have been talking, and they do require reforms. Shri Prakash Singh ji has taken up this cudgel for the last 2 decades. He has been fighting. He has been fighting for institutional reforms, and maybe we need to look at internal reforms within the police system. The Indian Police Foundation has established a center for internal police reforms. We are trying to look at many of these issues and seek what best can be done. Now, apart from this, let me add a couple of more points with regard to the present pandemic. You see, there was no experience any police force anywhere in the world or India had in dealing with such a pandemic. So there were no existing SOPs or instructions as to how to go about. And as the time given was only 4 hours, so maybe there was hardly any time to prepare as well. So this lack of experience, the lack of time to prepare, lack of existing SOPs, coupled with maybe the government pressure that enforcement at any cost. You see, the lockdown was announced in March 2020 when there were less than 500 cases. But maybe the instructions were to shut everything. So anyone available on the ground who is visible maybe for his job, may to get the essentials, he took the stick from the police. And it has resulted in excesses, which include, I still remember the deaths of father and son in Tamil Nadu. There was one person, I think in West Bengal, who had gone to fetch milk. And he was beaten badly. So there have been such aberrations. I think, so government instructions were there, and maybe police was also overzealous in following those instructions. And people did suffer. Another issue was, you must have observed that the instructions were evolving. Instructions kept on changing very fast. Every 3rd day or 4th day, there used to be a different instruction from the Government of Health or even Ministry of Home Affairs. So even maybe they were thinking and they were evolving the processes. Right from stopping the migrants in the last week of March 2020 to facilitating the migrants in the last week of April and first week of May. So it took a full cycle of the instructions. So as the report says, there are reports where police beat the migrants, and they were really, really so pathetic. And there are reports the police helped the migrants later in reaching to the railway stations or reaching to their villages. There are states like Odisha where there are reports that even they arrange the buses for making them reach the villages. So things went across all. Now, another one issue which I would like to highlight here is, you see, police were doing this duty with all the time a risk of infection to themselves. I must bring it on record that almost 3.8 lakh police people out of a total strength of around 27 lakh have been infected. So which comes to around 12% of the police force getting infected with the COVID, as against the 2.5% of general population. And there have been even the deaths, to my knowledge, around 2,657 police personnel have died. So you see, if more police get infected, then you cannot continue with the duties. So all the time, a lot of emphasis was to be given to the internal resource management, looking at the police stations, looking at the police lines. You should be able to manage the COVID spread there as well. So I think if Common Cause can do an analysis of the police response during the second wave, you would find a huge difference between the police response in first wave and second wave. The second wave, you found the police escorting oxygen cylinders, making green corridors, making oxygens available to the people at home, arranging medicines for the senior citizens at their homes. So maybe they had learned their lessons, but it took them some time. And what we really need is, we need to prepare the pandemic response plans in the police forces. So actually, Mr. Ramchandran from the Indian Police Foundation, he has, along with BPRND and NPA, we have held some meetings and conferences where we are trying to prepare these pandemic response plans as well as SOPs. In a future, if it happens, if there is a third wave, how do you deal with it effectively? Meanwhile, I just, in a passing reference, I must mention that last year when this COVID started, I was part of NHRC as special rapporteur. In the month of May, I did write to the NHRC, seeing all these police excesses, that they must issue guidelines for the police as to behave properly and protect the rights of the citizens. NHRC did constitute a committee, and there are report available which came later on, which does talk in terms of minimizing the arrests, all kind of unnecessary arrests, what Nikita was talking, and maybe the response relation to the prison management as well. So I think my last point I would like to make is for the common cause. You see, we 80 or 90 discussing these reports at this juncture is all very well. You must make some effort to ensure that this report reaches around 700 SPs and CPs in the country. They are the people on the ground, may not be the whole report, at least some gist of it, maybe some kind of a regional workshops and seminars, Common Cause with the help of IPF or VPR, and they can organize in the state headquarters, because unless it reaches the people who really matter on the ground, the report would become only an academic exercise. So I think that's all I would like to say at this time. Once again, thanks for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ishkumar sir, for that very, very useful analysis. You, of course, prefaced all your comments by saying that what you were going to say was not holding a brief for the police, but drawing from your many years of police experience to be possibly able to explain some of the findings. And you very rightly focused on the need to take seriously the implementation of the police reforms that has been spoken of for a long time. We would now move to our third panelist. I would request Shri Pillai to make his observations on the report and on the subject under discussion. Dr. Pillai.
Thank you, Professor. By and large, I think what we need to remember is that what is coming out in the report which has been brought out today, released today, is actually a reflection of, in one sense, what the police have been doing for the last few decades. There's no change. So this is exactly the way that they have been behaving in the past, whether it was the pandemic or the non-pandemic. Almost the same pattern is visible during normal times and during pandemic times. I don't see any great difference whatsoever. The real point that I would want to make is that training for the police has always been a low priority, right from the constable onwards up. And because the training for the constabulary has been so poor, it results in the lack of what I would call as what they are supposed to do. And they are reflecting the lack of training in terms of how they are to perform. Now you will see that states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and so on, where the police constabulary as well as the SIs, the station house officers, etc., are far more educated. They're all graduates, postgraduates, and so on. You will find that their way in which they react to these situations is quite different from somebody who would be there in UP or Bihar, and so on. One particular aspect which I would like to highlight, and I think it is, I've seen it, a lot of people have, I've got feedbacks from many of the police officers also, is that for the first time during the pandemic, the police started getting what I would call as favorable reactions from the media. And the favorable reactions from the media actually, in a self-fulfilling prophecy, made sure that this is what the public expect from them, and therefore DCPs, SPs, station house officers, etc., started to actually perform as what the media was reporting, that the police is helping, the police is doing this, they're getting all the good kudos from the media and from others, and the police started, in one sense, behaving exactly like that. And it is something which, again, by the time the second wave broke out, you will find that the police were completely pro-public, willing to help out in any manner in which the public faced difficulties at many stages. So part of the self-fulfilling prophecy was, I think, which is brought out in the media, in the report itself, for the media being very positive. I think the fact that the media was so positive was actually good for the police, because the police are, pardon my saying so, many others may not agree, they are in fact one of the most vilified forces in terms of the publicity that they get. They are overworked, they are very, very put under tremendous pressure, especially the lower constabulary, and they do so much of what I call as non-policing work, which is what also during the COVID time they had to do, that they are under tremendous pressure, in fact, to solve problems which are really not police problems. One other aspect which many people must also realize at the time, that because the notifications, etc., were put under the National Disaster Management Act, the provisions of penalties, etc., also came up under the National Disaster Management Act, which are a little bit more strict than the normal IPC and CRPC. So one positive impact I take is that if you look at the police and treat the police better, they do respond. And we have seen that in many of our, in tier 1 cities, and I can only speak for myself in a tier 1 city, is that the resident welfare associations, the way in which they interacted with the police, the station house officers, respect that was given to the police at both when they came to the colonies or when people from the RWA went to the police stations, is, I think, was an eye-opener for many of the police, and they realized that you have friends in RWA who actually look up to the police to help solve many of their problems. And that, I think, was very important. The last point which I would like to make, and I think it's very important because this is not going to be the last crisis that the police are going to face. And you've got now, whether it's a cyber security infrastructure attack, whether it's a natural calamity, whether it's the water crisis, which is going to come about because of climate change and so on, the police are going to be more and more involved. And therefore, not only do you need standard operating procedures, which are required from area to area, it's not just one standard operating procedure. You will need standard operating procedures depending on whether you are in a tier 1 city, in a tier 2 city, in the rural area, and what specific steps need to be done by everybody. A small feature which I, having worked as a district collector in the field and so on, normally when there's been a natural disaster in the field, a number of other agencies get involved. This time, for whatever reasons, only the police was actually used in the field, except a few other departments like health and who had to be directly involved. But it never used in the field was always the revenue department of the government of India and the states has always been in the forefront of any disaster management. And I didn't see any of them acting in the field today during the pandemic. And I think this over-dependence on the police to resolve all the issues also created certain problems in the fact of many other issues not being within the purview of police. They just did not have the knowledge about how to react to some of these situations. And therefore, you had the rough and ready police method of saying, use the lathi and solve the issue for the time being. I think that is what is one observation that I would like to make at this stage. I will stop here.
Thank you so much, sir. That was, I think, though you were extremely brief, I thought you made certain very, very important comments. Friends, we still have around 6 or 7 minutes before the scheduled time of close of this particular segment. There are a few questions which have come up. So what I would do is, I'm going to address one specific question to each of the 3 panelists and request them to take 2 minutes each to respond to the question that I'm posing to them, which is coming from the audience. Nikita ji, the question which I'd like to pose to you, which has come from the audience, is this. One of our participants raises the question that, does not the accuser's right against self-incrimination under Article 20, Clause 3 contribute to the failure of fairness and justice in the criminal legal system, is the question. So Nikita, if we could have a quick response to you from that particular question.
Professor Shastri, just to make sure I understand the question correctly, is the question that the accused person's right against self-incrimination?
That's right. Does that
contribute to fairness and justice? Sorry,
does that contribute to the failure of fairness in the justice system is the question.
Okay, I think so. The right that is enshrined in Article 20 is one that has, of course, been included after much deliberation by the Constituent Assembly, and one that was recognized as a fundamental right for the precise reason that, accused people, persons, need to are protected from any kind of coercion that might be subjected to, that they could be subjected to, that would lead to them incriminating themselves, and then for that incrimination to be relied on to then further convict them, right? Because that is exactly, it's in direct violation of the principle of innocent until proven guilty, which is the ethos of criminal law and the criminal justice system. So for us to say that the right against self-incrimination is one that contributes to the question of unfairness in the system is, according to me, an incorrect analysis. And it's because precisely to even protect this right that there are several safeguards that are built into criminal procedure, which is to say that, any kind of testimony that is recorded in police custody is not admissible as evidence in court. So there are procedures that have been built to ensure that this right is safeguarded. And I also want to say this, in addition to what the question says, is that there is a constant juxtaposition between the rights of the accused versus the rights of the victim or the survivor, right? And I think that juxtaposition is an incorrect analysis, because the rights of the accused exist in isolation and not in contravention to the rights of the victim or the survivor, right?
Thank you so much, Nikita. Thank you so much.
Protect both. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that response. Dr. Ishkumar ji, there is a question which has come from Kamal Jaswal ji, which raises that this duality of perception which this report sees, do you think that's a reflection of the sagacity of the common people to transcend personal experiences and reflect on police in the changing and challenging times? So is this duality of perception a reflection of this, that the sagacity of the citizen to be able to transcend their own personal experience and reflect on the larger police in challenging times? Ishkumar.
Yeah, I think that's a very intelligent question, but I won't agree with the proposition. We shouldn't be challenging the intelligence of the common man in India. So it is because they see the police doing both good works and the bad works, and they don't find any other agencies maybe on the ground, and they realize that somebody had to enforce it and enforce for their good, because otherwise COVID infection would spread. So maybe little on the high side, whenever they use the force, they still found the police was doing their job, even if there was so I really don't think it's a question of, but maybe it could also be a thing that is how they have been facing the police over a period of time, and this is what their behavior has been. It is perhaps after a very long time that a lot of police personnel were seen doing good as well. So that seeing good and beatings both simultaneously, so maybe that is why the duality of the opinion, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Pillai sir, there is a question which raised by Ruchi Sinha ji, which says that what is coming up in this report and what is also being mentioned by the panelists reflect systemic issues that go beyond individual police personnel. And is it really a question of the quality of training that our police personnel are given, which has caused the type of response that citizens seem to come up with?
Yes, insofar as definitely the constabulary that is right up to the station house officers, the quality of training is actually very poor as compared to the training that IPS officers get. I think it's a well-known open cliche that no senior police officer would like to be posted in a training academy. Unlike the army, where the best officers are posted to the army training institutions, and any army officer who's posted to a training institution like Wellington or Staff College and so on, he knows that he's on his way up. He's been handpicked, and therefore sending the best people to the training institute, you actually make sure that all the students or the the probationary and the junior officers they see the best of the force. Whereas in the police, for a very long time, they've actually seen, when they come for training, they see the worst of the force. And therefore, that has had a tremendous impact on the training that they should have normally got. I'm not saying there are some systemic issues, definitely there are, but I think the quality of training desires tremendous improvement.
Thank you so much, Pillai sir. I hand it back to Radhika ji. I think we have had a very, very interesting input from all our three panelists, and all of us are now waiting for the Honorable Justice to make his comments, but I would hand it back to Radhika ji now.
Radhika, there is a small request. Can Prakash Singh ji, if he wants to say something in a minute or so, would you like to make a comment, sir? Mr. Prakash Singh ji, as everybody knows, like one of India's best known police officers and also governing council member of Common Cause and part of our team and our patrons.
Thank you, Mudgal. I'll be very brief and just about a minute and a half. I'll just flag the points. I won't go into details. Firstly, there were no SOPs when the pandemic broke out. We just didn't know how to go about it. Therefore, in the absence of any instructions, the first reactions of the police left much to be desired. Here and there were excesses. Here and there was unwarranted use of force. But as things settled down, as instructions started coming, from the senior bosses, and also we disseminated some instructions from the Indian Police Foundation, of which I happen to be the chairman. As those instructions started reaching the headquarters, we found the responses more sober, more mature, and more within the framework of law. The third point which I want to emphasize, that police was the one and the only department in the country which went beyond its charter in handling the pandemic. Others performed their jobs. Okay, fine. But our job was only enforcement of the regulations. We went beyond that. We arranged supplies of oxygen. We saw to it that essential commodities reached the needy people. We saw that the old people got their needs attended to. We gave our own blood. Our officers sang and danced. They went out of their way to see that people who are in distress are looked after, and also the mental health is also taken care of, in the sense that they're entertained. The media's appreciation, mind you, media is very stingy in appreciating the police. They jump at any opportunity. The police is the most convenient punching bag for the police. If the media appreciated the role of the police, there is a deep reason behind it. It's not that we bribed them. It's just that it came out of their own volition. It was spontaneous, and it was a genuine appreciation of police role in going beyond their charter, and doing things which they are not expected to. And so much so that a national daily said that the police are today the front line of the front line. And the Prime Minister also appreciated what he saw, the humane side of the police, which became manifest during the pandemic. There was a survey carried out, I forget the name of the body, but that survey brought out that there was a quantum jump in the popularity of the police force during the pandemic. And one last observation. You see, we all say that yes, policemen are brutal, they are callous, they are harsh, they can be cruel, they are discriminatory, all those things. But whatever we saw during the pandemic, mind you, it was not because the Director General Police wanted them to go out of their way, but we saw the humane side of the police. And I would say that given a proper environment, the police would really perform extremely well and to the expectations of the people. But you give them that environment, which does not exist today. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash Singh ji, and thank you to all the panelists and Sandeep ji for bringing out the nuances around policing during the pandemic and placing the findings of the report in the larger context of ground realities. I will now like to introduce the keynote speaker for today's event, Justice Deepak Gupta. Justice Gupta is a former judge of the Supreme Court of India. He spent nearly 16 years in the higher judiciary, first as a judge of the Himachal Pradesh High Court, then as Chief Justice of the Tripura and Chhattisgarh High Court, before his elevation to the Supreme Court. During his tenure, Justice Gupta has passed innumerable judgments defending the rule of law, green justice, independence of judiciary, social justice, human rights, and the right to dissent, to name a few issues. Some of his famous judgments include the Goa mining case, the Heem Trivesh Environment Protection Society case, which is amongst the most significant judgments in the field of environmental jurisprudence, and the Environment and Consumer Protection Foundation case. Justice Gupta has also been an advocate of fair trial and social justice, even within the criminal justice system. In the inhuman conditions in 1382 prisons case, the bench comprising Justice Gupta and Justice Lokur issued extensive directions for training and sensitization of prison officials, appointment of counselors for prisoners, conducting a performance audit of prisons, exploring the idea of open jails or open prisons, and to account for the number of unnatural deaths of children in conflict in law in childcare institutions. We are pleased to have him with us today as a keynote speaker and chair of the panel discussion. I would request Justice Gupta to please give the keynote speech now. So.
Thank you so much, Radhika. I'm extremely grateful to Common Cause and to and to CSDS for giving me this opportunity of placing my views. Vipul deserves a special thank you because he's been interacting with me regularly. And I had been thinking about how to address, whether to give a written address or to speak, react to what has been said. And I thought it will be a combination of both. Speaking today is also brings back memories of the founder of Common Cause, Mr. H.D. Shuri. I, as a young lawyer, used to follow him avidly because I used to also do a few public interest litigations in Himachal. And coincidentally, after I got married, my in-laws and Mr. H.D. Shuri were very close friends, and he would walk down from his residence in West End to my in-laws' residence in Sant Vihar, and we would exchange notes, and especially when I was there in the winters during the vacations from Simla courts. And I did assist him in drafting a few petitions in the 80s and 90s, and in the 90s rather. When I think about a police, when you think about a policeman, what do you normally imagine if you would think? You would imagine a person who evokes a feeling of trust. But in India, unfortunately, it is not happening. The first feeling is of suspicion or fear. I mean, it's not only for the poor and all, for anybody, थाने में जाने से डर लगता है. Even if you want to be the complainant, you're worried whether you'll go to the police station or you also want to settle the matter outside without involving the police. And why is that happening is because of the perception. So when this report says that the underprivileged and the Muslims or the minorities were targeted more, or they bore the brunt of the more brutality of the police, I think if Common Cause does an analysis of what is it pro-pandemic or post-pandemic and during the pandemic, the figures may not be very different. The percentages, because our archaic criminal justice system, this 1860 Police Act and the old criminal procedure, they're all geared in favor of the rich and the powerful. I said this in my farewell speech in the Supreme Court, that our entire system, a rich man charged with an offense, if he does not get bail, he will move heaven and earth, and the Supreme Court will order that his trial should be expedited. If he gets bail, then he'll move heaven and earth, challenge every order, and go up to the Supreme Court. He can engage the best lawyers, and the trial will never come to an end. Whereas the poor person never has that equality, which otherwise is promised to him under Article 14 of the Constitution. So we have to look at it in this context. What one of this young girl, Nithika, if I'm not wrong, she printed, the actual picture on the ground of what happens. But especially with regard to Muslims, I must say, in the context of this COVID pandemic, it was not the police alone. It was the media. It was the general public. After that incident in Nizamuddin, it was all as if it's these people who have brought in COVID to the country and they're going to infect. It's like as if they've started a war against the country. It was not only police, and the police officials are also human beings. They also get affected by that. Every day there were reports, and people in high office who should not have been saying things which they said against the Muslims. So I think that was an aberration. There's no doubt about it. And we can't say that it is an aberration. It was an aberration, and it should have been corrected at the earliest. Unfortunately, it took almost a year for the high courts to quash the FIRs. See, they were targeted. We can't deny the fact they were targeted. Because when Nanded happened, and a lot of pilgrims from Nanded brought in corona to the Punjab, then there was no such reaction. When there was when you had in Haridwar these Kumbh Mela and all, there was no targeting of a community. But that time a community was specifically targeted, and the police formed. I mean, they were not an active sort of thing, but they also went with the flow. Now, I'm like a babe in the woods when I am in front of people like Mr. Prakash Singh and Mr. G.K. Pillai, because they have much more experience than I have. And the sad part is that since the 1902 first reforms being started, the Julio Ribeiro Committee, the Padmanabhan Committee, the 7 directions given by the Supreme Court in Mr. Prakash Singh's case, which I also happened to handle at one time with sitting with Justice Madan Lokur, and they've not been implemented. The Model Police Act, framed by Soli Sorabji committee, that still is in the, it's been buried in the icebox. So I feel we have to think without going into the larger system of reforms, though for me, 2 things are very important: separating the investigation and the law and order wing as directed by the Supreme Court. I go a bit further than that. I don't know what your panelists feel like, but I personally feel this security, providing security, so-called security to so-called VIPs, is no job of the police. I can imagine providing security to the Prime Minister, the President, and a few people. But today, everybody wants XYZ. Every XYZ wants XYZ security. And a lot of the police force is, used to give security. That should be outsourced, because this is really not part of the policing job, I feel. And the way these so-called police security officers are treated by the people and their families, to the people to whom the security is given, and by their families. I was recently in Leh, and all I saw these police constables doing was lugging shopping bags of the Mem Sahibs. Now when that happens to the police constables, if you don't give respect to the constabulary, how do you expect it to give you respect? For me, a very important part before, it's very easy to vilify the police. We all love vilifying, finding a villain, and then we just go after him. I find that the first, let's look within ourselves. And I'm talking not as a judge or anybody, but as a citizen of the country. Do we give the police the respect they deserve? Especially the police at the constable level. He represents the law. We are a country which believes which professes to believe in the rule of law. If we are to believe in the rule of law, then the police constable must be given the respect due to him. Here, a policeman can be waving and telling you, please stop your car, you'll just rush past. Yesterday, I was telling Vipul yesterday or day before, to a family of 4 in Simla, being requested by the policemen to wear masks. They laughed. Couple of yards, 10 yards later, the policeman got them 4 masks and told them, please wear the mask. They went another 50 yards and threw the masks aside. And then I had to tell the policeman that now you please challan them. Otherwise, what is this happening? You see, now if they in such circumstances become harsh or very harsh, if we don't, he's saying it for our good that wear a mask. But when we don't respect, the larger issue is, do we respect the law? We don't. And when we don't respect the person who enforces the law, that is another big problem. And the biggest problem is every day a police constable faces a statement from somebody whom he stops, "Tu janta nahi hai mera baap kaun hai." And unfortunately, the baap will come to the aid of the accused, and the police constable, even if he is right, will be told, please don't do anything. It's a sad state of affairs. In Simla, a few days back, there was a newspaper report that some tourists beat up the police officials on this issue of masks. And later, the police said, don't withdraw the cases against the tourists. So, this can't work that way. When we talk of what are the problems, I agree with Mr. Pillai, and in fact, this is the first point in my written note, is the training of the police, the training of the constabulary. we are training them in methods which are age-old, which have no relevance in today's date. They have no scientific methods of, they're not taught scientific methods of training. If any one of you, I mean, obviously the police officials have visited, but if the lawyers and the activists visit a police training school, they will see that a very brutal method is used to train the police officials, the constables. You know, they've taught brutality at that stage. And as was said, that you never post good IPS officers to the police training schools. It is a punishment posting in a way. Now, if you don't have good training, a scientific temper where you are taught, where you're sensitized to deal with the public, where you're told that a more humane approach is the better approach. It's not that policemen are, you see, when you deal with policemen individually, they're as good, as bad as any human being. But when they wield power, जब वो हाथ में लाठी आती है, you know, there was a role play in the Stanford University about 20 years back, where maybe 20, 30 years back, where a psychologist gave these role plays to people and made them jailers, and somebody made the prisoners. Even in the role play, while acting, the people actually became aggressive, and it led to the death of one of the actors playing the role of a prisoner. That study has been criticized many times because the psychologists went too far with the study. But that is what, when you give them power, when they wear the khaki and wield the lathi, then they feel that they can be harsh. But that is what has to be taught to them, is that they have to be more humane in dealing with it. And one of the very important features which must be, whether training or otherwise, is rule of law. As I said, rule of law applies to the citizens also, but it applies with even greater force to the police force, which enforces the rule of law. They cannot, today, totally illegal methods of surveillance, totally illegal methods are being used against the general public. This cannot be done. You see, we cannot defend the police taking action not in accordance with law. But what do we do when you have a chief minister of a particular state saying, "Thok denge," and is this the language which anybody should tell the police that ki thok do, jo aata usko thok do? Tell them you deal with them in accordance with law, and make your police force efficient, that they, with their efficiency, can get people convicted. It is not, I've had experience in 3 states, very different experience in 3 states. Himachal may not be the most efficient police force, but probably one of the least corrupt police forces in the country, and fairly competent, very humane. Tripura, a very honest police force. When I went there in 2013, a very honest police force, but still totally corrupt because it was totally politicized. It had allegiance to a particular party. I went to Chhattisgarh thereafter, corruption ruled the roost. So how do you deal with these issues if you do not, you have to answer these questions? Because that's why I'm not dealing with the reports, because all the participants have dealt with the report in detail. But for me, training is very important. Counseling is very important. You see, mental health of the police officials. How you expect them to work 11 to 15 hours a day and not turn angry? Agar any one of us, if one is made to work morning to evening, the family does face a little bit of the anger late in the evening. So they are also humans. As Dr. Ish Kumar gave those figures, that the level of, I mean, many more policemen were affected than normal human beings. Their normal job is just to maintain law and order and investigation of crime. Now we're asking them to go into a much wider domain of pandemic control or managing the public during a pandemic. And if most of the excesses are seen, they happened in the 51st month or so. I really don't blame the policeman on the ground because he was not trained to deal with this issue. Suddenly, a lockdown is announced. The policeman has no procedures to follow, no training manual which he has to follow. And he is told कि अब किसी को दिल्ली से बाहर नहीं जाने देना. And if 30,000 or 40,000 people gather at Anand Vihar bus stop to leave the station when one state announces that we will provide buses and the central government says, no, you will not let them go out, then what happens? That poor policeman, I mean, with one policeman dealing with 50 or 100 persons who want to go out, and poor migrant workers, everybody let them down, the government let them down, the courts let them down, all of us let them down. You see, sitting in our homes, comfortable homes, we can't even imagine what happened to the migrant workers. And they were brutally treated by they were the persons who were brutally treated by the police. But I again will not go to the extent of totally blaming the policemen on the ground. It's the system, the police force, the larger system which has to be blamed. The same policemen came to the aid of migrant workers. They came to the aid of others, providing medicines, etc. They're not Jekyll and Hyde personality. These policemen don't have a Jekyll and Hyde personality. But when they were dealing with large numbers of people, the only thing they had been taught throughout their lives is, jab aur kuch nahi to bas danda hi chala do. So they used the danda against the migrant workers. By and large, otherwise, there were aberrations which I don't agree with, which I personally don't even like. Somebody being made to ki kisi ka murga bana do. That's not the job of the police. I'd rather that they find them than make an example, because that is not, you can't take the law into their own hands. But we can't hide the fact that in some of our states, the police is becoming highly politicized. I will not say politicized in the sense of being politicized to the a particular ruling party, but politicized in the sense of going out of their way to help the party in power. We see it day in and day out. If a lynching takes place, then the police turns their face away. They don't find witnesses. And if we had a few days back virulent slogans being raised in Delhi against a particular community, and the police people find it difficult to even identify some of the people. And on the other hand, when it's the shoes on the other foot, they get all the latest information, then face identification, this, that, voice identification, and within the days, everybody's arrested. So we can't deny the fact that the police is becoming highly politicized, and it always works in favor of the ruling party. It is not whether we talk about West Bengal or we talk of UP or we talk of any other state, they are being politicized to support the ruling party, which is a very dangerous, very, very dangerous trend, because the police must be a very fair arbiter of disputes and a very fair investigator. I never practiced on the criminal side much, but what I learned of criminal law was that the investigation must be very, very fair. Use of disproportionate force is something which ails any police force. We have the Floyd case in America. We have that father and son in Tamil Nadu. It's just somehow when you give power to people, then they just tend to misuse that power. And it's some research will have to be done by Common Cause or the others, that why do policemen who are even otherwise very, very humane, but once they, get into a situation, then they just lose control over themselves. Who fears the police the most? That was one question being raised. It is obviously the poor, the underprivileged, the people belonging to minorities, those from disadvantaged sectors who fear the police. The rich, when the battle is between the rich and the poor, it is always the poor who suffer. And this is not only with regard to the police force. You take anything, when anything happens in this country, a change is brought about, it is not the rich and powerful who will suffer. It is always the poor and the marginalized who will suffer. And that is what happened to the migrant workers. That is what happened when the eviction of tenants, as Vipul was talking about, the eviction of tenants taking place. I think I've covered what all I had to say. I'll end only by saying this, that we have now, I find there's not a great shortage of the police force. I was reading the figures, probably there is a 7 or 8% shortage than the desired numbers, but we're very close to the numbers. What I feel is, first of all, the training, schools and the training must be modernized, must be updated. The police must be humanized and sensitized to the needs of the poor, because they're as much citizens of this country as the rich and the powerful. They need to be their living conditions of the poor, of the police officials, and their working conditions need to be improved a lot. You can't expect them to work 12 to 15 hours a day and then expect them to not lose their patience. Thirdly, we ourselves need to have a certain respect for the rule of law, respect for the police force. And when a police constable says, "Sir, ye kar do," we should not hesitate and not question his authority without any rhyme or reason. I'm not defending the police for when they take undue, when they're brutal or they use undue force. But I've seen, even in a normal conversation between the policeman and an ordinary middle-class citizen, there's always an element of argument. Even if the person knows that he's wrong, he'll make an excuse. मैं तो यही कर रहा. I mean, if you're not wearing a helmet, even if you're going to while you're driving a two-wheeler, and you're going, just because you're going to the shop near your house does not give you the right not to wear a helmet. Then there's arguments and the counter arguments, and then the force is used. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. We can't just vilify the police force, but the police force needs improvement, especially as far as brutality is concerned. And we also need to give them respect. That's all I like to say. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for bringing out some of the structural issues from within the policing system itself, and for highlighting the importance of rule of law, which is something that we as an organization have also been advocating for over the years, and also in this report. Let me now introduce Dr. Suhas Palshikar, who will be giving the vote of thanks. Professor Suhas is co-director of Lokniti and chief editor of the journal Studies in Indian Politics, an author, columnist, and researcher. He specializes in the areas of political processes in India and political sociology of democracy. He has been an advisory team member of the SBIR series. Dr. Suhas ji, please give the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Before I turn to the event of this afternoon, I would like to extend our hearty thanks on behalf of both Common Cause and Lokniti to the Lal Family Foundation and the Tata Trusts, also to Shloka for her kind and encouraging words, and a large team of our researchers who have made these reports possible. Turning to the event this afternoon, all of you would agree that it turned out to be a very enlightening, but also an event encouraging introspection. And that is mainly because of our panelists and the valedictory speaker who drew attention to both where we need to critique the police and where we also need to critique ourselves, the society or the civil society more generally. So on behalf of Common Cause and Lokniti, I extend our very heartfelt gratefulness to the three panelists for their very perceptive comments both on the report and on the general situation of policing during pandemic and more generally, to Advocate Nikita Sonavane, Dr. Ish Kumar, and Mr. Pillai. I also thank Justice Deepak Gupta for his extremely thought-provoking valedictory keynote address, which in a sense summed up the arguments that came up during the course of the last 90 minutes of discussion and gave us enough food for thought so that we can really go back to our reports and also look at those reports and ask further questions about law and order. So thank you very much. And I also thank all the viewers and listeners who have made it possible to attend this function and listen to this very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We will now be closing this event, and you can download the reports from either the Common Cause website or the CSDS website.